Hi, I'm Dr. Steve Yacovelli, owner and principal of TopDog Learning Group, and also known as the Gay Leadership Dude. Today, we're going to talk about three really awesome things. The first is looking at how unconscious bias can get in the way of your own leadership success, thinking about resiliency and what that means to you and your work team and those within the workplace in order to be more successful, and really thinking about the challenge that during post-COVID, your rockstar employees, LGBTQ or otherwise, may have the freedom to leave if your workplace isn't as inclusive. So stay tuned.
Welcome back to part two of our conversation with Dr. Steve Yacovelli. Now, he is a very highly in-demand diversity and inclusion change management leadership expert. He has a consulting firm called TopDog Learning Group. He works with Fortune 500s, with nonprofits. He works with universities. He's done all kinds of great things. He's the author of Pride Leadership Strategies for the LGBTQ plus leaders to be kings and queens of their jungle. He's a catalyst for making the world a bit more inclusive, and he's a generally great guy. Aside from that, we're having this conversation, and we've been talking about in part one, as you may remember, we talked a lot about what is inclusion in a much bigger sense than just, gay, straight, of color or white. There's much more to it than that. And Steve laid out these 6 levels of inclusion. And we talked about allyship and how to actually be an ally and understanding those things too, and even looking at our own unconscious bias. But where I want to go into this next piece is really talking about resilience in the gay community coming into work, but in the other side of it, not being in any part of that community and trying to be an ally, but feeling like you put your foot in your mouth. So I want to talk about the resilience of that. But I also want to talk about this, and this is an important subject that Steve and I were talking about in the break, and that is this. I'll give you a quick example. I was working with a organization many years ago, and we were working with the executive team, as we do, and it was a founder plus an executive team, and we're having great work with them, having great results, making enormous amounts of progress with them. And the founder was not in the room for this particular meeting. It was about like half a dozen in, and he was not in. He was going to come in later. He was on an important call. Fine. So we're, I'm doing a quick round. How is it going? Great. Oh, love this, and I've really learned that. And tell me what you've learned. And so we're doing this. And then the founder walks in, and everybody goes quiet, which is fine. And then we say, okay, so I'm ready to start. We've already done the warm up with everybody else. And he just shuts it down and says, you know what? We're going to stop this. And I said, oh, okay. Tell me why. Is there something happened? He goes, yeah, this is a waste of money and a waste of time. And I was like, oh, okay. Why is that? Are we not getting the results? And he goes, no, it's a waste of time. And I go, that's interesting. And I said, because I just had a conversation with everybody in the room, and everybody in the room is telling me how much they're getting out of it. And he goes, oh, they're just saying that because it's you. Okay, good. So let's try again. So I go around the room, and everybody agrees with him. Yeah, well, it does take a lot of our time, and maybe we're not getting the results that we really want. That sycophantic bullshit goes on all the time. And it goes on in what you call silent collusion. So sometimes it's a sycophantic response of a yes, sir, no, sir, 3 bags full, sir.
Yep.
And sometimes it's just in silence. So let's talk about what you call that silent collusion.
Yeah. So when I work with clients and that type of thing happens, or it's or that same leader in the room says some really crappy comment like, well, all women drive, and that's a real story that happened. I was actually in Atlanta. There was a client. We were doing a closeout for a change situation, and just as the meeting starting, it was like maybe 40 plus people in the room. Only 2 of my team members, top doggers as we call them. The rest was like all of that corporate group. And just as we're about to start, that senior executive says, well, how women drive. And everyone's just like, whoa, but no one said a word. Everyone just kind of looked. And at that moment, we were all engaged in silent collusion, where we were tacitly supporting this crappy comment that the senior executive, and it's important to note that it was male, said at that time. And so one of the things that I share with a lot of the leaders that I work with is don't do that. Don't engage in silent collusion, because unless you totally want to undermine your own credibility and any street cred that you've created in the trust factor, to be inclusive of all the others that are out there. And so I for my book, and actually for some of the trainings that we do, I created 6 steps that you can remember to beat silent collusion. And then, just because people can't remember stuff, I use this dog. If you're watching, you can see the little picture there. It's a Hungarian pulley mop, or it's a mop dog for short, and his name is Sam. And so Sam, it helps us think of Mop Sam. And so
Right.
it's 6 letters, and it's cheeky and it's silly, but numeric things for stuff to remember. But it really helps you in that moment. Like, well, all women drive. What can you do so that
Right.
you aren't seen as supporting that that disparaging comment, and also that you can address it in a comfortable and respectful sort of way. And that's kind of where Mop Sam comes into play. And it's pretty simple. The first M is it's me. So you just think to yourself, is this statement that was just said about me personally? And if it is, then you can speak from that perspective. Obviously, a woman in the room might say something like, well, gee, Bob, I think that's pretty inaccurate. I'm consider myself a very good driver. And so, it takes a lot of personal discovery and of course courage to do that, but you're putting yourself out there. And then the out is or the O is out, and you call out the absolutes or stereotypes that you hear. So it's something like, so Bob, you've been with every woman driver in the world, that kind of thing. And
Right.
and a lot of these only work for certain contexts as well as certain personalities. I am, and I believe you are the same. You're gifted with the ability to be a smart ass, and sometimes that could be so awesome. I did notice that.
I thought I'd covered it so
and
well.
I tried to hide it. I have that gift as well, and so I can say stuff like that to that senior executive, and it's like, oh yeah, you're right. Some people can't, so pick and choose. The P is you point out a specific statement. Now again, this requires you to have some data. So you might say, so Bob, when we went to lunch the other day and Juanita drove, I think you'll agree that she was a great driver. And so again, contacts that may or may not work. My absolute favorite one is one of my favorite ones. There's 2. Is the S, and that's just say a non-word. And that's actually what happened in this situation at the client. And that non-word is something like, whoa, damn, what, huh? So what you're doing is you're sending that it's a verbal, but it's kind of a non-word message that I'm not on board with this. Now, the good thing is, yay, I get out of the silent collusion umbrella. The bad thing is I'm not really addressing what that person said. So it's a bit of a selfish one, but it can work, again, in certain contexts. My absolute favorite one is the A, ask. You just ask them what they meant by that. But the challenge with this one, especially if you're on the receiving end of that disparaging comment, is the emotion, and not letting you get emotionally hijacked, as we used to say when I was at IBM. And so it's just simply saying, Bob, what exactly did you mean by that statement? Or not the Bob, what did you mean by that statement? Very different context. But the A is so powerful, because what's typically happening is that senior leader is, or really any leader, is operating from that unconscious bias, women. And so you're just pulling them out of that into the 40 bits of data that our conscious can focus on versus the 11 million bits of the unconscious kind of processing. And then the last one, which is not always possible, is the last M is move. You physically remove yourself. This is good in social situations, AKA when COVID is not a thing, where you can just physically say that, you hear this when people say those really off-color jokes and you're just not cool with it. You physically move. Again, you're not addressing it, but you're showing that I'm not on board with this. And I think with the leaders that I've worked with, when they accidentally engage in silent collusion, they so undermine their own credibility. And that's not a way to be a consciously inclusive leader, and to show that you're creating that sense of belonging for all of us others.
So, I love Mop Sam. It's great, but I'm going to push back.
Okay.
And the pushback is this. When I'm working with a company, this is pretty early on. I'll say to one of the executives, I'll say, okay, who's the number one person who answers to you? They'll tell me who it is, and I'll say, okay, what's their number one job? And they'll tell me, and I go, no, it's not. And they go, well, what is it? And I said, their number one job is to keep you happy because you decide whether they get a paycheck.
Mm.
That's it. So there is never going to be equalized communication inside of a power dynamic. And how sort of deflated that becomes depends upon the leader, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I mean by that is that sometimes people are not going to say anything because we may not know that, but they're 2 paychecks away from homeless. We may not know that they've got a kid who's in hospital and they just spent their life savings.
Yeah.
We may not know that they've not been very good with their money. And as a result, they have to be very cautious. And so they're not agreeing. They may go home and bitch to their partner about the fact that the boss is a dick. But the fact of the matter is they're not going to go through any of those mopsams because it's like there's fear. And that's a very powerful motivator sometimes to do nothing.
Yep, absolutely.
I talk about the good Germans, right? They're good Germans. It's just like, it's not that I agree with what the Nazis are doing in the 1930s and 40s, but you know what? Don't want any trouble.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you're hitting, Matt, is absolutely correct. And if I'm speaking to the senior leaders right now, because you create the culture that's there. And having that self-awareness is how things like MopSam can be useful in the workplace. If you're the toxic leader, game over. I mean, you're going to undermine every bit of credibility and advancement that your team is going to try to make. And so I challenge every leader to have some self-awareness. In Pride Leadership, I talk about having a drone perspective and, mindful meditation. I know you've talked about that before, being self-aware of what you do, what you don't do, what you say, what you don't say. That's, if I boil it down to what I've done with executives over the years, it's just helping them see that, you know what, sure, you're the top dog, no pun intended. All right, totally intended. But you're the top dog of this pack, but are you doing it right? And can you check your ego at the door if you really want to create a culture of inclusion? And if the answer is no, then that's where, and I hear what you're saying with the employee who's like, well, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. But even if it's not as dire of a situation, no one I know is an indentured servant to their role. And yes, there's context. Yes, there's, I need that paycheck. Yes, these are all true and real things. But at the end of the day, we all have the opportunity to put ourselves as best as we can in a situation that is more positive for us than negative. And so the victim syndrome, woe is me, I can't leave this job because I need the check. I struggle with that at times because I think that's that easy excuse when I don't have that courage to either stand up within that workplace or to stand up for my own value system and find a better fit of a boss or a work context.
So again, you just brought up something that's really, I think, is vitally important. I mean, aside from superficial self-awareness, which I call Popeye leadership, I am that I am.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? That's what I call it, Popeye leadership. I've written about that. And people think that that's self-awareness. That's not self-awareness. That's self-stuck. But we are talking about self-awareness on all sides, whether you're the leader or whether you're the person under any leader, even if you're a leader of others. That self-awareness is about finding your own value set and the courage to live that. And, I'm a great believer in this. I teach this in my work with everybody, which is what you do is what you do. And so if you shut up at work, you shut up at home. You think you don't, but you do. And so that self-awareness is why I think that it's the number one factor in leadership is if you don't self-examine, how can you possibly have full compassion and empathy and serve and be at that level with the people that you're looking after?
Yeah.
But again, Steve, that is a challenge to get people to go to that.
Yeah.
So walk us through a little bit of that into, you've got these 6 pieces that are laid out. And if you're watching this on camera, you can see that that this is the rainbow flag. It's authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. Now, you could take away that rainbow flag, and every
Absolutely.
one of those is absolutely appropriate in leadership,
Absolutely. Yep.
right?
Yep.
So this is not exclusively for the gay community or queer community. This is like, you be a leader, you better have these.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I really started to frame up my book Pride Leadership. It was going to be like a generic leadership book, just because I mean lots of people write them, they're great, but and so I was thinking about, well, what are the competencies that I'm seeing smart leaders rocking and rolling? It exactly what you just said, Dov. It's these six. But then as I was getting into it, getting into the book and kind of doing my research and thinking about what I've seen, I started to look at other queer leaders. I do a lot of work in the social justice system, of course, trying to make equality a thing. And I'm looking at my peer group doing that. And then that little Carrie Bradshaw, I couldn't help but wonder, if you remember Sex and the City. And I'm like, I couldn't help but wonder, is there something to these six when you put that through the rainbow lens? And that's kind of the focus on Pride Leadership. Now, the cool thing is, the best piece of feedback I received was from my editor on the first draft. And she's like, and I'm nervous as anything. I'm like, oh gosh, Heather's gonna like totally tear this thing apart. And so I'm on the phone with her and she's like, okay, so I finished reading it. I'm like, and she's like, I have to tell you, I'm not your target audience. I'm a white cisgendered straight woman. I'm like, oh. She's like, this is the book I wanted for my MBA program on leadership. I'm like, what? And she's like, it's solid theory. It's cheeky dad jokes. She's like, you need to de-gay the next book. I'm like, no. Because no one speaks to this in my community. However, what I keep finding more and more, especially with the online training program that goes with it and all that stuff, we have so many allies in it. And they're just like, it's really fun, but it's like cool leadership stuff. I'm like, yes, because these are what the six, just like you said, empathy. Empathy is massive in order to be an effective leader. Having courage is massive. I start with authenticity in the book on purpose. Obviously there's the Brene Browns and all those cool folks talking about authenticity, but through the queer lens, it's what power is it? If I'm an out gay man in the workplace, if I'm a trans person being my authentic self in the workplace, that not just takes courage, but my authenticity leads to better leadership. And so that's kind of how we talk about it. And so to your point about the senior executives, you have to want to take the work. If you have to want to take those steps to be better than you are right now as a leader. And what I get frustrated with is these massively successful men and women leading great organizations through their own lack of awareness. It's horrible. And being unaware of the pain that they're causing the rest of their team. And it's just like, how can you not be self-aware, or how can you have such a huge ego that you don't see the greatness that you could be if you just have some of these things?
But that's the challenge, is that so many of them are very powerful, but not self-aware. And it's because they're a hangover from a previous generation, and they are my generation and even a little older, but they did get their power. They got their leadership by whatever those means were. And this is part of the thing I'm always trying to get across around diversity and inclusion is what worked won't work. And it may still work in the context of you're in power, but it won't work in the context of making the system work. Because people, for the first time in history, have greater levels of freedom to go, you know what, I'm out. And I'm going somewhere else. And I'm going to take all of my skills and my dress, even though you think I'm a bloke, but I'm going to take, my outfit, my trends or whatever it is, or my eyeshadow or my whatever it is, my haircut, and I'm going to go somewhere else. Because somewhere else doesn't care that I'm wearing a dress, boots, or makeup. What they care about is I'm a good human being with a ton of skills that you just lost out on because of your problem.
And then you throw on top of all that, post-COVID and bunny ears, whatever, post-COVID, whenever it gets to, where for a lot of folks, we've just proven they can work from anywhere. And so what you're going to have is the really rock star talent want to be included. They want that sense of belonging. And if they don't have it, you know what? I can log out of Zoom and log over here and go to this other company. And I think that's so exciting that, it's going to be an employees marketplace now, just like it's a seller's market in a lot of the real estate world. It's going to be an employees market now. And if you're really great and you can prove that you have the ability to work anywhere, like we've just really proven in so many areas, obviously not all, but that's exciting to me. And I think smart organizations are really quickly waking up to this, because I just see it here in Central Florida. Hiring can't happen. There's so many open jobs, especially of course in the hospitality industry, but there's so many open jobs because people they left or they were let go, and then like, well, I can now work in New York City, but I can still live here in Orlando, Florida, and that's totally awesome.
Yeah,
it's gonna be really interesting.
So let's go to, because you're absolutely right, because all these 6 traits are essential to real good leadership: authenticity, courage, empathy, communication, relationships, and culture. And for me, none of those are real unless there is self-examination. So unless you have the courage to self-examine what is your authenticity,
Exactly.
you will never know how to have real empathy. You will communicate in a way that will fumble. Your relationships will be built on a poor foundation, and the culture you're creating will have nothing to do with what it is you really want. So absolutely agree with that fundamentally. Now I want to come to this piece around resilience, because I know that you talk a lot about resilience, and I feel like, and you and I talked about it before, that resilience is something we've covered in other shows, but I really want to understand it from your lens, through the pride lens of understanding what is real resilience, and how can we on both sides of this have a greater level of resilience.
Resilience to me, and what I work, I was lucky enough, I worked for IBM for several years as a change management person. And that's really where I dove deep into understanding human resilience. And what does that really mean? And because obviously any organization has like the change management process. Here's how we're going to implement this new business process, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but it's humans at the core.
Exactly.
Humans are the ones that are doing all this stuff.
Hey, good luck with that.
Yeah. And, oh my gosh. I always loved when we were doing a big project and all of a sudden they're like, oh, we got to cut budgets. We'll cut that change management thing. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're so silly.
Well, hold on a second, just before you go in. I mean, let's look at 2020. I remember when the pandemic was announced and everybody went into freak out, and the first group to be cut was diversity and inclusion.
Yep.
Then George Floyd happened, and every company freaked the hell out and went, oh my God, where's our diversity and inclusion? Well, you just cut their budget, you knob.
Yeah.
How are you going to bring them back? Oh, well, we understand. No, you don't.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
We always cut the thing that's most important first.
Yep. Oh yeah. I mean, at 9/11, I was working for an organization. I was an internal leadership consultant, and they're like, "Oh, we need to find something to do with you because we know you're going to get cut." I'm like, "Oh, come on! This is right now. You need leadership." Anyway, but when we think about the concept of resiliency, it's really how humans get through the change and don't just survive, but thrive as best they can. I'm talking workplace context for now, but obviously this is for in life in general. And that's why I love when we get the opportunity to teach this for clients, because we're doing it to be a better employee, but it's like, it's going to make you a better human if you have that awareness of your own level of resiliency and do some strategies to amp it up. And my favorite, when you look at what does resiliency really mean, and there's tons of fantastic books and I've read a whole bunch. My favorite, though, common thread for all of them is having more of a positive view of the world, and it's not putting on my Mickey Mouse like, oh boy, everything's awesome. It's not that, but no. It's really saying that, okay, I just had a shitty day, but what's one thing that happened today that was actually pretty cool? And when you start to rewire your mind that way, it's so fantastic how you start looking for those bright spots regardless. And so flash forward to COVID, a lot of people were just, and rightfully so, freaking out. And I kept telling people, if you just survived today, that's awesome. Now, if you thrived, that's even better. And what made you thrive? And so you start to, it's not the Pollyanna positive, but it's finding those bright spots, that silver lining. When you get into those times of change, that can absolutely be that lifeline to save you. And then there's other aspects of resiliency, such as having that, and go back to that self-awareness thing, being aware that most likely, unless you're a wicked blessed human, you've probably had some ups and downs in your life, and you reflect on, when I was down, how did I get up? Was it family? Was it focus, or what? I mean, I've been fired from jobs before, and I often think, what did I do when I was like, I'm out of a job? What's next? And what got me up? Because then flash forward to those low times that you're at, reflect on, oh, you know what? When I was low before, I dusted off my resume. I looked at my CV. I went to online to look for jobs and started networking better. Yeah, that's the way to do it. To think about how you got success and how you got out of the low, and apply that again. And I think the third one that I think is absolutely the most valuable, and this is probably the biggest problem people have with change, it's being okay with ambiguity. And so we don't know. I mean, my goodness, look at the past year plus we've all been through. How can we be more comfortable with the ambiguousness of the situation, through things, and like reflecting on, all right, stop, what can I really control versus what is completely out of my control and out of my influence? And is that where my energy is being spent? Well, that's silly. Don't do that. You have that awareness to say, okay, I'm focusing on these things that I can control, or at least not control, but at least influence. Fantastic. You're not wasting your energy or spinning your wheels. And I think when we think about resilience in any times of change, through those at least three lenses to start, really can make some great traction to be better at change.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot even in that to unpack that's worth digging into, and I know that people can go do more of that with you personally, with your organization, but also with the book, and I encourage them to do that. And I want to sort of just have people grasp that you're going to fail. You're going to fail at inclusion. You're going to fail at diversity. You're going to fail at leadership. And in this context of resilience is and I hate that when things become just part of the lexicon of language, and because it just dilutes it so much. Oh, failure is good. No, it's not. It feels like shit, right? Right. But it can be good.
Yeah.
And it's for me, the piece that I am always trying to help people with is, it's okay for it to feel like crap.
Yeah.
And understand that it's not going to last. That's the key.
Yeah.
So like, be okay with understanding this feels shitty. I just got dumped and I'm crying my eyeballs out and I feel like I don't want to live. But am I going to feel like this in a year? Yeah, maybe. What about in 2? Probably not. Okay. What about in 5? Definitely not. Is there a good chance I'll meet somebody else? Okay, maybe. So can I get out of bed this morning? Right? It's that understanding that the failure feels like crap, and be okay with that.
Yeah.
But not live there, not move in, not take all your old photographs and place them in that box called Shitsville and live there, but actually go, okay, I'm visiting Shitsville. It's all right. I don't like it. I'm visiting, but I'm not putting up a tent. I'm moving house. So this is okay.
Yep.
So
yeah,
that's for me is so important in understanding this, how we're approaching diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. You're going to mess up. I mean, it's just human nature, like you said. And so when you mess up, go back to the positive kind of look at the world. What do we learn from it? We failed, or we didn't fail, but we weren't as successful as we could have been. Why? Dive deeper, find the bright spots that worked, and then rinse and repeat. And so, you don't just like throw everything out. You say, you know what? Wow, we don't have, for example, benefits for our trans employees. Well, you know what? Yeah, that's a failure. But what can we do now? How can we get those? How can we change that? And more importantly, or as importantly, let people know that you have that self-awareness and you're trying to correct the ship. I've worked with way too many leaders in companies who are just like, "Ooh, let's hide that." I'm like, "No, own it. You messed it up, own it, show you're
Yeah.
learning from it, and move on. And don't
Yeah.
just make it like a big PR drama. Just okay, here it is, and now we're going to move on."
And again, this is really great leadership. So often has to do with, like we talked about before, vulnerability, the
Yeah.
willingness to say, "Yep, made a dog's breakfast of that one. Gonna do it again." Okay, we're gonna, and that builds such an enormous amount of trust.
Yeah.
As we come to the end, Steve, there are a couple of things I want to ask you, sort of as sort of quick punch in the face,
Yeah.
grab attention things, and that is this: for the for the person who is a member of the LGBTQ plus community who's watching or listening to us, I would like for you to give them one piece of practical guidance.
Hmm.
And then I'm going to ask you on the other side, for the person who wants to be an
Sure.
ally, who is a leader,
Yep.
what is the practical piece of guidance for them?
Actually, for both, I would have the exact same piece of advice.
Wonderful. Okay.
So if you are a queer person, and you are within an organization, a larger organization that has employee resource groups or affinity groups, business resource groups, whatever they're called, and there's one for the LGBTQ plus community, be a part of it. If you're a senior executive within, and then this is actually for allies, be a part of it. If you're a senior executive, sponsor it and support it. Be visible, and that's for everybody. Be a visible ally, be a visible queer person, because that visibility matters. And so if I'm seeing you as an ally, and I'm maybe, according to the latest human rights campaign, which is HRC, it's an advocacy group here in the States, still 50% of queer people aren't out at work. Still, I haven't seen the latest data, but 50%. So if I'm an ally, people will notice that, especially people who aren't out. So do that. If you are a queer person, do that, because then people will see you. And one of the challenging things for being a member of the LGBTQ plus community is we are typically an invisible minority. Like neurodiversity and other things, you have to tell people you have it or you are it. And so, obviously, coming out a lot takes courage, and being authentic takes courage. But being able to share either "I support you" if you are or not, or "Hey, I am, and here I am," that's a fantastic thing for all of us to do.
So again, we're back to self-assessment, self-knowledge, and then the courage, right? So much of this is around courage.
Yeah.
And and I think that in many ways the ally is the person who will have courage for you. And I think that that's an important thing to say. It may not be safe for you, whoever you are, to speak out right now, to have the psychological safety. But I'm going to tell you that I'm going to have the courage to say, even though I'm not maybe a member of that community, I'm a white straight guy, or I'm a white straight woman, that I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to stand by your side when you come out. I'll be there by your side, and I'll if I can in any way be the person you lean on, I'll be that.
I love the concept of allyship, where it's you have three positions in the context. I'm either standing next to you and you got your side, I'm sitting in front of you to protect you and lead the way, or I'm sitting behind you and letting you take the charge. And I won't be like the white knight, no racial pun intended, but I'll get your back and support you and give you the energy behind the scenes. And it's contextual for the person in the situation, but I love that idea. It's next to you, in front of you, or behind you, whatever the context kind of creates.
Yeah, and again, I'll be in front of you, behind you, or inside of you, based on what you need, not what I think you need.
Brilliant.
Because nobody wants to be, I mean, it doesn't empower anybody to rescue them.
Yes.
Right. So that's really important. Steve, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I really appreciate it. Thank you for awakening us and helping all of us understand more. And like I said, even those of us like me who are genuinely an ally, want to support in all kinds of ways, there's always more to learn. I said I've had gay friends my entire life. My family about them, and I'm learning, and I'm failing, and I'm blowing it, and constantly. But there again, I'm doing that as a leader
right.
with straight people too. So,
Right.
that willingness to step into that. And I really thank you for awakening us and then enlivening us. And for those who want to find out more, please tell them where they can find the book and more about you and all your resources.
Yeah, the best spot is just going to our main website, topdoglearning.biz. There you can find more about me, my team, the bunch of books that I wrote, including Pride Leadership, as well as the online classes and face-to-face classes when we can do those, and all the fun stuff we can do to help make your workplace even more inclusive.
Fabulous. And of course, we will put all of the links to all of those things, including the book and social media links, and as well as the website on the show notes. And I really want to thank you, dear listener, for joining us today. It has been amazing. Remember that you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes inside of our LinkedIn and Facebook groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, you can go to dovbaron.com, DOVBARON.com, because unified actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can have a deeper level of self-knowledge so that you can be an ally to the others in your group, whether those others are gay, straight, of color, or just different. Remember, we all want to belong. Everybody's looking for a place to belong. And if you want to do great leadership, that's the focus. Not on who can we bring in or who can we exclude, but rather on how can we make everyone feel like they belong here in this organization. I'm Dov Baron. I am here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.